The dust from the stagecoach hadn't even settled when Amelia Edwards heard the gunshot that ended her planned journey west. The driver slumping forward with a crimson stain spreading across his chest, as three masked riders circled the disabled coach like wolves around wounded prey. She pressed herself against the velvet seat, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs, watching as the other passengers were ordered out at gunpoint. The robbery took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours as rings were yanked from fingers, watches torn from chains, and her own small purse with its meager savings disappeared into a burlap sack. When the bandits finally rode off in a cloud of Nevada dust, they left behind a dead driver, a crippled stagecoach with a broken axle, and 6 terrified passengers stranded 15 miles outside Pyramid City, with the sun already beginning its descent toward the western mountains. The other passengers, a banker and his wife headed to San Francisco, a traveling salesman, and 2 miners returning to the Comstock lode, decided to walk back to the last town they'd passed through, some 8 miles behind them. Amelia had looked ahead at the road stretching toward Pyramid City and made a different calculation. She was 22 years old, had left everything behind in Missouri after her father's debts had consumed their farm, and she'd spent the last of her money on that stagecoach ticket with a promise of work waiting for her at a boarding house in Pyramid City. Going backward meant admitting defeat before she'd even arrived at her new life. So she walked forward alone, carrying only a carpetbag with 2 dresses, a nightgown, her mother's Bible, and a silver locket with her parents' faded photographs inside. The road was little more than packed earth and rocks, winding through sagebrush and scattered juniper trees, with the distant peaks of the Virginia range rising purple and imposing against the darkening sky. Her boots, which had seemed sturdy enough in Missouri, weren't made for this kind of walking, and within 2 miles she felt blisters forming on both heels. The September evening brought a chill she hadn't expected, and she wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the temperature dropped with the sun. She'd heard about the desert's extremes, how it could burn you alive by day and freeze you by night, but experiencing it was different from knowing it. Her throat grew parched, and she realized with growing panic that she had no water, no food, and no real plan beyond putting one foot in front of the other. Night fell like a curtain, sudden and complete, and the stars emerged in such profusion that she stopped walking just to stare up at them. She'd never seen such a sky, even in rural Missouri. Out here, with no town lights to dim them, the stars seemed close enough to touch, a river of light flowing across the heavens. But their beauty couldn't warm her or fill her stomach or ease the ache in her feet. She must have walked another hour in the darkness, stumbling over rocks she couldn't see, before she heard it, the creaking of wagon wheels and the steady plod of hooves. At first, she thought she was imagining it, that desperation was playing tricks on her mind, but the sound grew louder and more distinct. She turned to see a lantern swinging in the darkness, attached to a wagon approaching from behind, moving at the unhurried pace of someone with no particular deadline. Amelia's first instinct was fear. The bandits could have circled back. Any man alone on this road at night could be dangerous. But the alternative was continuing to walk until she collapsed or froze. So when the wagon drew close enough for her to make out the shape of a single driver, she stepped into the middle of the road and raised her hand. The wagon came to a halt 20 feet away, the lantern light casting long shadows across the hard, packed earth. The driver was a man in his mid-20s, wearing a worn leather jacket and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. Even in the dim light, she could see the way he sat in the seat, relaxed but alert, his right hand resting near something she couldn't quite see but suspected was a rifle. "You lost, madam." His voice was deep and measured, with a hint of Texas in the vowels. "The stagecoach was robbed," Amelia said, her own voice sounding strange and thin in the vast darkness. "The driver was killed. The others went back, but I need to get to Pyramid City. I have a job waiting there." The man was silent for a long moment, and she couldn't read his expression in the shadow of his hat brim. "That's a hard road to walk alone at night. I know." She took a step closer, abandoning any pretense of pride. "Please, sir. I have no money left to pay you. The bandits took everything, but I'm a hard worker and honest. I could help you with whatever cargo you're hauling, or I could work off the debt once we reach town. I'm begging you. Please let me ride with you." Another long silence stretched between them, filled only with the sound of the horses stamping and blowing, the creak of leather, and the whisper of wind through sage brush. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough over the past 6 months, watching her father drink himself to death with grief after her mother passed, then dealing with the creditors who descended like vultures to pick apart everything her family had built over 2 generations. "I don't need payment," the man finally said. "And I don't need help with the cargo, but I won't leave a woman alone on this road at night." He gestured to the seat beside him. "Ride with me as long as you need." Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees went weak. She walked quickly to the wagon before he could change his mind, and he reached down to help her up. His hand was calloused and strong, and he lifted her onto the seat with easy strength. Up close, she could see more of his face, the strong jaw shadowed with stubble, the straight nose, and eyes that reflected the lantern light like polished stone. "Name's Luke Owens," he said, releasing the brake and clicking his tongue to get the horses moving again. "Most folks call me Luke." "Amelia Edwards," she replied, settling her carpetbag on her lap. "I'm grateful to you, Mr. Owens, truly grateful." "Luke," he corrected. "And you don't need to be grateful for common decency. Though I will say, walking alone at night after a stagecoach robbery shows either courage or foolishness, and I haven't decided which yet." Despite everything, Amelia felt a smile tug at her lips. Perhaps both. The line between them seems awfully thin sometimes. He made a sound that might have been a laugh, low and brief. "Can't argue with that." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon rolling steadily forward through the darkness. Amelia became aware of the cargo he was hauling, several wooden crates tied down with rope in the wagon bed, but she didn't ask what they contained. It wasn't her business, and she was in no position to be curious about a man who'd shown her kindness. "You said you have a job waiting in Pyramid City," Luke asked after a few miles had passed. "At a boarding house. Mrs. Sullivan's place. She needs help with cooking and cleaning, and she's offering room and board plus a small wage. It's not much, but it's honest work and a fresh start. Mrs. Sullivan runs a good establishment. Clean, respectable. You could do worse. You know her. I've stayed there a few times when I'm passing through. She's fair, doesn't cheat her boarders, and she makes the best apple pie in Nevada territory." Amelia felt another wave of relief. She'd answered an advertisement in a newspaper, sent a letter, and received a reply offering her the position, but she'd had no way to verify if Mrs. Sullivan was legitimate or if she was walking into some kind of trap. Hearing Luke speak of her in such ordinary, reassuring terms eased a worry she'd been carrying for weeks. "What about you?" she asked. "What brings you out on this road at night?" "I run freight between towns. Pick up goods in Virginia City or Carson City, deliver them where they are needed. Sometimes it's mining equipment, sometimes it's dry goods for stores, Sometimes it's personal items for folks who can't make the journey themselves. He glanced at the crates behind them. Tonight it's medicine. Doctor in Pyramid City put in an urgent order, so I'm making the run at night to get it there faster. That's good work, Amelia said. Important work. He shrugged, a barely visible movement in the darkness. It pays, and I like being on the move. Never been one for staying in one place too long. There was something in his tone that suggested a story behind those words, but Amelia didn't press. She understood about wanting to leave the past behind, about moving forward because looking back was too painful. The temperature continued to drop as the night deepened, and despite her shawl, Amelia found herself shivering. Luke noticed, of course. He seemed like the kind of man who noticed everything. Without a word, he reached behind the seat and pulled out a thick wool blanket, handing it to her. "Thank you," she said, wrapping it around her shoulders. It smelled of horse and leather and wood smoke, masculine and oddly comforting. "Can't have you freezing before we get to town," he said. "Bad for my conscience. You often pick up stranded women on dark roads." "You're the first," he admitted. "Usually it's stranded miners who spent their silver on whiskey, or traveling preachers who thought walking would bring them closer to God. One time I picked up a juggler who'd gotten separated from a traveling show. That was an interesting ride." Amelia laughed, a real laugh that surprised her with its spontaneity. She hadn't laughed in months, not since before her mother's death, and the sound felt foreign but good. "Did he juggle while you drove?" "Tried to. Lost 3 balls over the side of the wagon into the sage brush. I think he gave up performing after that, and became a store clerk in Virginia City." They talked more as the miles passed. Small conversations about nothing in particular, but each exchange felt significant to Amelia, like she was building something with words, creating a fragile bridge between herself and this stranger who'd shown her kindness when he had no obligation to do so. Luke had a dry sense of humor that emerged gradually, and she found herself smiling more than she had in a long time. He asked about her journey west, and she told him the abbreviated version, leaving out the worst details about her father's decline and the humiliation of having creditors pick through her childhood home like it was a scavenger hunt. She mentioned Missouri, the farm, her parents' deaths, and the need for a fresh start. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he simply nodded as if he understood completely. "Nevada territory's full of fresh starts," he said. "Everyone here is running from something or toward something, sometimes both at once." "What about you?" Amelia asked. "What are you running from or toward?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. The wagon creaked and swayed, the horses' hooves made a steady rhythm on the packed earth, and the stars wheeled slowly overhead. Finally, he spoke, his voice careful and measured. "I grew up in Texas on a ranch. Family business going back 3 generations. I was supposed to take it over someday, marry the girl my parents had picked out for me since we were children, raise my own children to take over after me." He paused, and Amelia saw his jaw tighten. "But I didn't want that life. Didn't want to be locked into someone else's plans for me, so I left. Signed on with a cattle drive heading north when I was 18, and I've been moving ever since. That was 7 years ago. Do you miss it? Your family, the ranch." "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I don't regret leaving. A man has to make his own choices, live his own life. Even if those choices disappoint people." Amelia understood that sentiment deeply. Her father had wanted her to marry a local merchant's son, a pompous man 15 years her senior who'd offered to settle some of her father's debts in exchange for her hand. She'd refused, and her father had been furious, though by then he was so deep in his bottles that his anger was just one more slurred accusation among many. After he died, The merchant's son had made the offer again, directly to her, and she'd refused again before packing her few belongings and buying a ticket west with the small inheritance her mother had hidden away from the creditors. "I think choosing your own path takes more courage than following someone else's," she said quietly. Luke looked at her then, really looked at her, and even in the darkness she felt the weight of his gaze. Maybe that's what separates courage from foolishness after all. Courage is choosing your own path. Foolishness is following someone else's and pretending it's yours. They arrived in Pyramid City just before midnight, the town appearing as a scattering of lights against the dark landscape, nestled in a valley with the Virginia Range rising behind it. It was smaller than Amelia had imagined, maybe 300 people at most, with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, several side streets branching off into residential areas, and the skeletal structures of mining operations visible on the surrounding hillsides. Luke drove the wagon directly to Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house, a two-story structure with a covered porch and lace curtains visible in the windows. A single lamp burned in what appeared to be the parlor, and Amelia felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. This was it. Her new life was about to begin. Luke helped her down from the wagon, and she stood for a moment on the wooden sidewalk, clutching her carpetbag and feeling suddenly uncertain. He seemed to sense her hesitation, because he said, "Mrs. Sullivan is expecting you, isn't she?" "Yes, but not until tomorrow. The stagecoach was supposed to arrive in the afternoon. She'll understand, and if she's already gone to bed, there's a hotel down the street. I'll make sure you have a room." "You've already done so much," Amelia protested. "I can't ask you to do more." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He stepped up onto the porch and knocked firmly on the door, a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet night. They waited, and after a moment they heard footsteps inside. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, gray-haired and substantial, wearing a night robe and holding a candle. She looked at Luke first, recognition crossing her face, then at Amelia, and her expression shifted to concern. "Luke Owens, what are you doing banging on my door at this hour?" "And who's this?" "Mrs. Sullivan, this is Amelia Edwards. I believe you're expecting her." The older woman's eyes widened. "Miss Edwards, but you weren't due until tomorrow's stage. What happened?" Amelia explained quickly about the robbery and the dead driver, and Mrs. Sullivan's expression cycled through shock, sympathy, and finally determination. "Well, you poor dear. Come in immediately. Luke, thank you for bringing her safely to my door. I'll see she's settled." "Actually, madam, I need to drop off some medicine at Doc Harrison's place, but I'll come back to check on Miss Edwards if that's all right." Mrs. Sullivan waved a hand. Of course. The girl will be fine with me, but you're welcome to visit during proper hours." She gave him a knowing look that made Amelia blush even though she wasn't sure why. Luke tipped his hat to both of them. "Miss Edwards, I hope your new position works out well. Mrs. Sullivan, I'll see you tomorrow." He turned and walked back to his wagon, and Amelia watched him go with a strange feeling in her chest, like something was being pulled away before she was ready. He'd been a stranger just hours ago, and yet his departure felt significant, leaving her oddly bereft. Mrs. Sullivan ushered her inside, closing the door against the night chill. The boarding house was as clean and respectable as Luke had promised, with polished wood floors, floral wallpaper, and the lingering scent of baked bread. The older woman led her upstairs to a small but comfortable room, apologizing that it wasn't prepared yet, but promising fresh linens in the morning. "You've had a terrible ordeal," Mrs. Sullivan said, her voice warm with genuine sympathy. "Try to get some rest, and we'll talk properly in the morning about your duties and such. Right now, you need sleep and safety, and you have both here." Amelia thanked her, and after Mrs. Sullivan left, she sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. Not from fear or sadness, but from relief and exhaustion, and the overwhelming feeling of having survived something she'd thought might break her. She cried for her parents, for the home she'd lost, for the girl she'd been 6 months ago who never could have imagined walking alone at night on a Nevada road. But she also felt something else beneath the tears, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she could rebuild her life. And tangled up with that hope was the memory of a steady voice saying, "Ride with me as long as you need," and the warmth of a blanket that smelled like wood smoke and kindness. Sleep claimed her quickly, and she dreamed of stars and wagon wheels and a man with eyes like polished stone. Morning arrived with sunlight streaming through thin curtains and the sound of activity from below. Amelia woke disoriented, her body aching from the previous day's ordeal, but the clean room and comfortable bed reminded her that she was safe now, that she'd made it to Pyramid City despite everything. She washed her face in the basin provided, changed into her other dress, a simple blue calico that was worn but clean, and pinned up her dark blonde hair in a practical bun. Looking at herself in the small mirror, she saw a woman who looked older than her 22 years, with shadows under her hazel eyes and a thinness to her face that spoke of hard times. But she also saw determination in the set of her jaw, and that would have to be enough. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Sullivan in the kitchen, a large room dominated by a massive cast-iron stove and a worktable scarred with years of use. The older woman looked up from kneading bread dough and smiled. "There you are, dear. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Amelia admitted. "Thank you for taking me in last night." "Nonsense. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Now let's have some breakfast and we'll discuss your duties. I hope you're hungry because I don't believe in skimpy meals." Amelia discovered she was ravenous, and she ate eggs, bacon, fresh bread with butter and jam, and strong coffee while Mrs. Sullivan outlined her expectations. The boarding house had 6 rooms for rent, currently all occupied by long-term boarders, minors mostly, who paid weekly and expected 3 meals a day plus clean rooms and fresh linens. Amelia would help with all of it: cooking, cleaning, laundry, and general maintenance of the house. "I won't lie to you," Mrs. Sullivan said. "It's hard work. My last girl left to get married, and I've been managing alone for 3 weeks. I'm not as young as I used to be, and I need someone reliable." "I'm reliable," Amelia said firmly. "I worked our farm from the time I could walk until the day I left Missouri. I know hard work, and I'm not afraid of it." Mrs. Sullivan studied her for a moment, then nodded with satisfaction. "I believe you. We'll get along just fine, Miss Edwards. Please call me Amelia." "Amelia, then. And you'll call me Constance when it's just us, though the boarders still call me Mrs. Sullivan. Keeps things proper." They spent the rest of the morning working together, and Amelia fell into the rhythm of it easily. She'd done this kind of work her whole life, just on a smaller scale. The boarding house was larger than her family's farmhouse had been, and feeding 6 boarders plus herself and Constance was more cooking than she was used to, but the principles were the same. Work hard, waste nothing, and take pride in doing things right. The boarders came and went throughout the day. Amelia met them at lunch, 5 men ranging in age from early 20s to late 50s, all employed at various mining operations around Pyramid City. They were respectful if curious about the new help, and Constance made it clear that Amelia was under her protection and any inappropriate behavior would result in immediate eviction. Amelia was cleaning the rooms that afternoon when she heard a knock at the front door. Constance called out that she'd get it, and Amelia continued stripping the bed she was working on, gathering the used linens for washing. Then she heard Constance call up the stairs. "Amelia, dear, you have a visitor." Her heart did an unexpected jump in her chest, and she quickly smoothed her hair and dress before heading downstairs. Luke Owens stood in the parlor, hat in hand, looking clean and rested, and somehow even more handsome in the daylight than he'd been by lantern light. He'd shaved, revealing the strong lines of his face, and his dark brown hair was still damp like he'd recently bathed. "Mr. Owens," Amelia said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Luke," he corrected again with a slight smile. "I wanted to check that you'd settled in all right after last night." "I have, thanks to you and Mrs. Sullivan. Everyone has been very kind." Constance appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron. "Lucas, you'll stay for supper, won't you?" "It's the least we can do after you brought our Amelia safely to us." "I wouldn't want to impose, madam." "It's not an imposition, it's an insistence. Besides, you said yourself that my apple pie is the best in Nevada territory, and I made 2 today. Surely you can spare the time to confirm that opinion." Luke's smile widened, and Amelia felt something warm unfurl in her chest at the sight of it. "In that case, I'd be honored to stay for supper." He did stay, and the meal was lively with the boarders all present, sharing stories from the mines and discussing the latest silver strikes. Luke fit easily into the conversation, clearly familiar with several of the men, and Amelia found herself watching him more than she should, noticing the way he listened carefully before speaking, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the capable movements of his hands as he passed dishes and poured coffee. After the meal, while Amelia and Constance cleared the table and washed dishes, Luke helped carry the heavy plates and platters to the kitchen, despite Constance's protests that he was a guest. When everything was cleaned and put away, Constance shooed them both onto the front porch, claiming she needed to work on accounts, and they were just in her way. The September evening was cooling quickly, the sun setting behind the mountains in shades of orange and purple that painted the sky like an artist's canvas. Amelia and Luke sat on the porch chairs, and for a moment neither spoke, just watched the day fade into night. "I never thanked you properly," Amelia said finally. "For stopping last night. You didn't have to, and I know that. You could have driven right past me and I wouldn't have blamed you. But you didn't, and that kindness might have saved my life." Luke looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, shifting in his chair. "Like I said last night, it was just common decency. Maybe for you, but the world isn't full of people with your kind of decency. I've learned that the hard way." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "What happened to you before you came west? You said your parents died, but there's more to it than that, isn't there?" Amelia hadn't planned to tell him everything, but something about the quiet evening and his steady presence made the words come easier. She told him about her mother's sudden illness, the pneumonia that took her in a matter of days. About her father's grief-stricken descent into drinking, how he stopped managing the farm, stopped paying creditors, stopped caring about anything except the bottom of a whiskey bottle. About the debts that piled up, the creditors who came circling, and the merchant's son who'd offered to marry her and clear the debts in exchange for ownership of her life. "I watched my father drink himself to death over 6 months," she said, her voice steady despite the pain of the memories. "And the whole time, everyone in town told me I should just marry Jacob Hartley, that it was the practical solution, that I was being stubborn and prideful to refuse. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't trade myself like cattle just to save a farm that was already lost. So you left. So I left." My mother had hidden away a small amount of money, maybe $20 that the creditors never found. She'd sewn it into the lining of her sewing basket. I found it when I was packing, and I used it for the stagecoach ticket and a little food for the journey. I answered advertisements for work in western towns, and Mrs. Sullivan was the first to respond with an actual job offer. Luke was quiet for a long moment, and she worried she'd said too much, revealed too much weakness. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than pitying. You left everything you knew, traveled 2,000 miles alone, and when bandits robbed you and left you stranded, you kept walking toward your goal instead of turning back. That's not weakness, Amelia. That's strength. She felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were different tears, prompted by someone seeing her clearly and not finding her lacking. Sometimes strength and desperation look awfully similar. Maybe, he acknowledged, but you chose to be strong when you could have chosen to give up. That matters. They talked until full dark, sharing stories, building on the foundation they'd started the night before. Luke told her more about his freight business, how he'd saved money from cattle drives until he could afford his wagon and team, how he'd built a reputation for reliability and honesty that kept customers coming back. He had no permanent home, staying in boarding houses or camping under his wagon depending on where his routes took him, but he seemed content with that nomadic life. "Don't you ever want to settle down?" Amelia asked. "Build something permanent, maybe someday," he said, "but I'm not ready yet. There's too much I haven't seen, too many roads I haven't traveled." He paused, then added, "Though I will say, some places feel more worth staying in than others." Something in his tone made her look at him sharply, and she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read in the darkness. Her breath caught, and the moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Before either of them could speak again, the door opened and Constance appeared. "Amelia, dear, tomorrow's going to be a long day with market shopping and extra baking. You should get some rest." It was a gentle dismissal, and Amelia rose from her chair, smoothing her skirts. Luke stood as well, reaching for his hat. "I should head back to the hotel anyway. Thank you for the supper, Mrs. Sullivan, and for the company, Amelia." "When will you be back in Pyramid City?" Amelia asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "I have a run to Carson City and back, so probably 4 or 5 days, but I'll be passing through regular. This is one of my main routes. Then I'll see you again." "You will," he promised, and the certainty in his voice made her heart beat faster. She watched him walk down the street toward the hotel, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the shadows, and she felt that same pulling sensation in her chest as when he'd left the night before. But this time it was tempered with the knowledge that he'd return, that this wasn't an ending but a beginning. The next 4 days fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and satisfying. Amelia worked from before dawn until after dark, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, helping Constance with the endless tasks required to keep a boarding house running smoothly. Her hands grew red and chapped from washing, her back ached from scrubbing floors, and she fell into bed each night too tired to dream. But she also felt useful in a way she hadn't since before her mother's illness. The work had purpose, and she was good at it. Constance praised her baking, her efficient cleaning, and her pleasant manner with the boarders. The older woman had a tendency to talk while they worked, sharing stories about Pyramid City, its residents, and the silver boom that had created the town just 8 years ago in 1871. It was nothing but sage brush and rock before they found silver in these hills, Constance explained while they rolled out pie dough together. Then, practically overnight, hundreds of men poured in, hoping to strike it rich. Most didn't, of course. They work for wages in other men's mines, but they keep hoping their luck will change. "You think it ever does?" Amelia asked. "Does luck really change, or are some people just fortunate while others aren't?" I think luck is what you make of the opportunities you're given, Constance said. Some men find silver and drink it away. Others work wages and save every penny until they can start a business or buy property. It's not the fortune that matters. It's what you do with it. Amelia thought about that while she crimped the edges of the pie crust. She'd had limited opportunities in Missouri, trapped by her father's decisions and society's expectations. But coming west had opened new possibilities, and what she made of them was up to her. On the afternoon of the 5th day, Amelia was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when she heard wagon wheels on the street out front. Her heart jumped hopefully, but she told herself not to assume. Plenty of wagons pass through Pyramid City every day. But then she heard Constance call out a greeting, and Luke's voice responding, and she couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. She quickly finished pinning up the sheet she was holding, wiped her hands on her apron, and tried to calm her racing pulse before walking around to the front of the house. Luke was unloading crates from his wagon, Constance directing him to stack them by the porch steps. He looked up when Amelia approached, and his face lit up with a smile that made her feel warm despite the October chill in the air. "Amelia, I hope you've been well." "Very well, thank you. Welcome back to Pyramid City." Constance smiled at both of them with the knowing expression of a woman who'd seen countless romances bloom and fade over her years. "Lucas brought supplies from Carson City. Flour, sugar, coffee, all the things we needed restocked. He's staying for supper again, naturally." "Naturally," Luke agreed, grinning at the older woman. He did stay for supper, and afterward they returned to their spots on the front porch, talking as the evening cooled around them. This became their pattern over the following weeks. Luke would arrive in town every 4 or 5 days, delivering freight, picking up new cargo, and always finding an excuse to visit the boarding house. Sometimes he helped Constance with heavy lifting or repairs. Sometimes he brought news from other towns. But mostly he came to see Amelia, and everyone knew it. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about the places he'd seen, the people he'd met on his routes, the endless variations of desert landscape that somehow never grew boring. She told him about her daily life at the boarding house, the small dramas among the boarders, Constance's stories about the early days of Pyramid City, and her slowly forming dreams about what her future might hold. "I've been saving my wages," she confided one evening in late October. "Constance pays me fairly, and since I have room and board, I can save most of it. Someday I'd like to have my own place, maybe a restaurant or a bakery, something that's mine that can't be taken away." "You'd be good at that," Luke said. "Your baking is even better than Mrs. Sullivan's, though don't tell her I said so." Amelia laughed. "Your secret's safe with me. What about you? What do you want for the future?" He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the darkening street. "I used to think I just wanted to keep moving, never tied down to any place or person. But lately I've been wondering if maybe I was just running away instead of running toward something." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Maybe what I want is something worth staying for." The air between them felt charged, and Amelia's heart pounded so hard she was sure he must hear it. They'd been dancing around this attraction for weeks, both of them careful not to move too fast, but the pull between them was undeniable. "Have you found it?" she asked quietly. "Something worth staying for?" "I think maybe I have," he said, and he reached across the space between their chairs to take her hand. His fingers were warm and calloused, and his thumb traced gentle circles on her palm that sent shivers up her arm. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands in the darkness, and Amelia felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness that she'd been searching for without knowing it. This man, this place, this moment, they all felt like pieces clicking into place, forming a picture of what her life could become. When Luke finally left that night, he kissed her hand in farewell, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and intimate. "I'll see you in a few days," he promised. "And Amelia, I want you to know that I'm serious about this, about us. I'm not the kind of man who plays with a woman's feelings." "I know," she said. "I wouldn't be here with you if I thought you were." Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened and solidified. Luke continued his freight runs, but he began timing them so he'd be in Pyramid City more often, sometimes stretching a trip to 3 days instead of 5. When he was in town, they spent every possible moment together, always properly chaperoned by Constance or in public places, but the connection between them grew stronger with each meeting. He courted her in old-fashioned ways that made her heart sing. He brought her wildflowers from the desert, blooms that survived in impossible conditions just like she had. He fixed things around the boarding house without being asked, repairing a squeaky porch board and a stubborn window that had stuck for months. He listened when she talked about her dreams and shared his own hopes in return. In early November, he took her on a proper outing, renting a buggy and driving her out to a place he'd discovered on one of his freight runs, a small canyon where a spring created a tiny oasis of green in the brown landscape. They had a picnic lunch that Amelia had prepared, and they talked and laughed and kissed for the first time under the endless Nevada sky. His kiss was gentle at first, questioning, giving her the chance to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't want to pull away. She kissed him back, pouring weeks of growing feelings into the contact, and when they finally separated, both were breathing hard and smiling. "I'm falling in love with you," Luke said, his forehead resting against hers. "I fought it at first because I didn't think I was ready, didn't think I wanted to be tied down. But loving you doesn't feel like being tied down. It feels like coming home." Tears pricked Amelia's eyes, happy tears this time. "I love you too. I think I started falling that first night when you said I could ride with you as long as I needed. You were a stranger, but you treated me with kindness and respect, and that's when I began to hope that maybe good men still existed in the world." "I'm not perfect," Luke warned. "I'm stubborn and restless, and I'm still figuring out what kind of life I want to build." "I'm not perfect either," Amelia countered. "I'm headstrong and I've got a temper when pushed too far, and I'm still healing from everything I lost. But maybe we can figure things out together." "Together," Luke repeated, and he kissed her again, sealing the promise. They returned to town that evening, and Constance took one look at their faces and smiled. "Well, it's about time you two admitted what everyone else could see. I was beginning to think you'd dance around it forever." "We weren't dancing," Luke protested. "We were being proper and respectful." "You were being slow," Constance corrected, but her tone was affectionate. "Now, Lucas, what are your intentions toward our Amelia? She's under my protection, and I need to know you're serious." "I'm completely serious, madam. I'd like your permission to court Amelia properly, with the intention of marriage when she's ready." Amelia's heart soared at hearing him say the word marriage so matter-of-factly, like it was already decided in his mind. She looked at Constance, hoping the older woman would agree. Constance studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. "You have my permission and my blessing, but I expect everything to remain proper until there's a ring and a wedding. Understood?" "Understood," they both said in unison, and Constance laughed. The next few months were the happiest of Amelia's life. Luke continued his freight business, but he started declining runs that would take him too far from Pyramid City, focusing on routes between nearby towns so he'd never be gone more than a few days. When he was in town, they spent as much time together as Amelia's work schedule and propriety would allow. He was there for Thanksgiving, joining the boarding house for a massive feast that Amelia and Constance prepared for all the boarders. He brought wine from California and told stories that had everyone laughing. He was there for the first snow in early December, when Pyramid City transformed from brown and dusty to white and magical. He took Amelia on a walk through the snow-covered streets, and they made plans for their future. "I've been thinking," Luke said as they walked hand in hand past decorated storefronts preparing for Christmas, "about what you said, wanting to have your own place someday. What if we did that together? I've saved quite a bit from the freight business and I'm good with my hands, good at building things. We could start a business together, something that would let us both stay in one place." "What kind of business?" Amelia asked, excitement building in her chest. "That's up to you. If you want a restaurant or bakery, we'll do that. If you want something else entirely, we'll figure it out. The point is we'd be partners, building something together." "Partners," Amelia repeated, loving the sound of the word. "Not you building something for me, but us building it together." "Exactly. I'm done running from commitment, Amelia. I want to build a life with you, roots and all." She stopped walking and turned to face him, not caring that they were in the middle of the street, snow falling gently around them. "Then let's do it. Let's build something together." Luke pulled her close, kissing her despite the very public setting, and Amelia heard a few good-natured cheers from passing townspeople who'd been watching their courtship progress. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and breathless, Luke said, "I think that means I should probably make this official." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box, dropping to one knee right there in the snowy street. "Amelia Edwards, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love you, support you, build dreams with you, and never leave you stranded on a dark road again." Amelia was crying and laughing at the same time, nodding before she could even get the words out. "Yes, yes, of course yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small but clear diamond. And then he stood and kissed her again while half of Pyramid City seemed to applaud. When they finally made it back to the boarding house to share the news with Constance, the older woman hugged them both and immediately began planning the wedding. They married on a cold but clear day in late January 1880, in the small church at the edge of town. Amelia wore a dress that Constance had helped her sew, cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of winter greenery tied with white ribbon. Luke wore a new suit that he'd ordered from a tailor in Carson City, and he looked handsome enough to make her heart skip. The wedding was small but well attended, with all the boarding house residents, many of Luke's business associates, and various townspeople who'd watched their romance bloom. Constance cried through the entire ceremony, and afterward there was a reception at the boarding house with food and dancing and celebration. When the party finally wound down and the guests departed, Luke and Amelia walked to the small house they'd rented on the edge of town, a two-room structure that was humble but theirs. Luke carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and when he set her down, she looked around at their new home and felt overwhelming joy. "It's perfect," she said. "It's drafty, the stove smokes, and the floor needs work," Luke countered, but he was smiling. "It's still perfect because it's ours." That first year of marriage was both challenging and wonderful as they learned to live together, to navigate compromise and communication, to build a partnership that was stronger than either of them alone. Luke continued his freight business but shifted his focus to more local routes. Amelia kept working for Constance for several months, saving every penny they could spare. In the spring of 1880, they found a small empty building on Pyramid City's Main Street, previously a dry goods store that had gone out of business. The location was good, right in the center of town, and the price was manageable with their combined savings. They spent the summer renovating it, Luke doing most of the heavy construction work, while Amelia planned the layout and design. They opened Owens' restaurant in September, exactly 1 year after the night Amelia had begged for passage on Luke's wagon. The timing felt significant, a full circle completed. The restaurant was small, only 6 tables, but Amelia's cooking was excellent and Luke's friendly manner made customers feel welcome. Word spread quickly, and soon they were busy enough that they needed help. They hired a young woman named Sarah, barely 18, who reminded Amelia of herself a year earlier, desperate for work and a fresh start. Teaching Sarah to cook and manage the restaurant gave Amelia a sense of purpose beyond just financial success. She was helping someone else the way Constance had helped her, creating opportunities that could change a life. Business grew steadily through the fall and winter. Luke had essentially retired from freight hauling, selling his wagon and team to focus entirely on the restaurant. He handled the business side, managing accounts and supplies, while Amelia ruled the kitchen. They made a good team, anticipating each other's needs, supporting each other through stressful rushes and celebrating successes together. In February of 1881, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She'd lost her mother young and had no female relatives to guide her through pregnancy and childbirth. But Constance stepped in, providing advice and reassurance, and Luke was attentive and protective without being overbearing. They expanded the restaurant that spring, buying the adjacent building and knocking through the wall to create a larger dining room with 12 tables. The renovation was completed just before Amelia's belly grew too large for her to move comfortably, and the increased business helped them save money for the baby. Their son was born in late October 1881, a healthy boy with Luke's dark hair and Amelia's hazel eyes. They named him Thomas, after Amelia's father despite everything, because she wanted to remember the man he'd been before grief destroyed him. Luke held his son with such tenderness, and wondered that Amelia fell in love with him all over again, seeing him transformed by fatherhood. The restaurant continued to thrive, becoming one of the most popular establishments in Pyramid City. They hired additional help as needed, and by Thomas's first birthday in 1882, they were successful enough to buy the buildings they'd been renting, securing their financial future in a way that seemed impossible when Amelia had first arrived in Nevada territory, penniless and desperate. But success brought its own challenges. The work was demanding, especially with a young child to care for, and there were times when Amelia felt pulled in too many directions. Luke sensed her struggle and suggested they hire a manager for the restaurant so she could step back and focus more on Thomas. "The restaurant was supposed to give us a better life," he said one evening after they'd put Thomas to bed. "But if it's consuming our life instead of enhancing it, then we need to make changes." They hired Michael, an experienced restaurant worker from Virginia City, to manage the day-to-day operations. Amelia still oversaw the kitchen and menu, but she no longer worked 12-hour days. The change allowed her to be more present for Thomas and to reconnect with Luke, remembering that their partnership was the foundation everything else was built on. In the summer of 1883, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and in March of 1884 they welcomed their second son, Samuel. He had Luke's easy temperament and Amelia's stubborn determination, a combination that promised an interesting childhood. The years rolled on, full of the everyday joys and challenges of building a life together. Thomas started school in 1886, a bright boy who loved books and numbers. Samuel followed 2 years later, more interested in being outside and getting into mischief. The restaurant continued to succeed, becoming a Pyramid City institution. Luke served on the town council, helping make decisions about Pyramid City's future as the silver boom began to slow and the town had to evolve beyond mining. Amelia volunteered with the church, helping other women new to the area, remembering her own desperation when she'd first arrived. She became known as someone who'd listen without judgment and help without condescension, and she formed deep friendships with women from all walks of life. In 1887, Constance Sullivan fell ill, a sudden decline that shocked everyone who knew her indomitable spirit. Amelia visited daily, helping care for the woman who'd given her a chance when she had nothing. Constance died in October, passing peacefully in her sleep, and Amelia mourned her like the mother figure she'd become. Constance left the boarding house to Amelia in her will, a gesture that moved Amelia to tears. They considered selling it, but Luke suggested converting it into a home for women in difficult circumstances, a place where women like Amelia had been could find refuge and help getting on their feet. Amelia loved the idea, and they established the Sullivan Home for Women in Constance's memory, funding it through the restaurant's profits and community donations. The home helped dozens of women over the years, providing temporary housing, job training, and connections to employment opportunities. Every woman who came through its doors reminded Amelia of herself at 22, desperate and determined, and she made sure each one knew they had value and potential regardless of what circumstances had brought them there. Thomas turned 16 in 1897, showing interest in becoming a doctor, a profession that required education they'd have to carefully plan and save for. Samuel, 14 and restless, talked about seeing the world beyond Pyramid City, taking after Luke's younger self. Both boys were good young men, respectful and hardworking, and watching them grow into adults filled Amelia with pride. Luke had silver threading his dark hair now, and lines creased his face from years of smiling and working in the sun. But he was still the man who'd stopped his wagon on a dark road to help a desperate woman, still capable of kindness and strength in equal measure. Their love had deepened over the years, growing from initial attraction into something profound and unshakable. On a September evening in 1899, exactly 20 years after the night they'd met, Luke took Amelia for a drive in their buggy, following the same road where he'd found her. The area had changed some, with more travelers and better maintenance, but the essential landscape was the same: sage brush and distant mountains under an endless sky. He stopped the buggy at approximately the spot where she'd flagged him down 2 decades earlier, and they sat together watching the sun set in shades of orange and purple that still took her breath away. "You ever think about that night?" Luke asked. "About how different things could have been if I'd driven past you?" "Sometimes," Amelia admitted, "but I prefer to think about what did happen rather than what might have. You stopped. You showed me kindness. You said I could ride with you as long as I needed, and somehow I'm still riding with you 20 years later." "You're not just riding with me," Luke corrected. "We're riding together now. Partners, remember?" "Partners," she agreed, leaning against his shoulder, "building dreams together." "Do you have any regrets? About leaving Missouri, about the life you left behind?" Amelia thought about the question seriously, considering the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. "I regret that my parents didn't live to see what I built here, who I became. I regret the circumstances that forced me to leave. But I don't regret leaving itself, and I definitely don't regret ending up here with you." Luke kissed the top of her head, a gesture of affection that had become familiar over the years, but never lost its power to make her feel cherished. I'm grateful every day that you were brave enough to flag down a stranger's wagon in the dark. That took courage. Or desperation, she reminded him, echoing their conversation from that first night. Both, he agreed, and both were necessary to bring you to me. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, that same incredible display she'd seen on her first night in Nevada. The stars had witnessed her arrival, desperate and alone, and now they witnessed her life full and complete. Thomas left for medical school in San Francisco in 1901, a bittersweet parting that was eased by pride in his ambition and determination. Samuel went with him, finding work on the docks while deciding what he wanted to do with his life. The house felt too quiet without them, but Luke and Amelia adjusted, rediscovering the rhythms of just the two of them. The new century brought changes to Pyramid City. The silver was playing out, and the population declined as miners moved on to new strikes elsewhere. But the town didn't become a ghost town like so many others. It evolved, surviving on ranching, trade, and the businesses like the restaurant that served the remaining population. Luke and Amelia's establishment adapted too, adding a general store section to provide dry goods and supplies alongside meals. In 1903, Thomas returned with his medical degree and a wife, a sweet woman named Elizabeth who'd grown up in San Francisco. They settled in Pyramid City, and Thomas opened a medical practice, filling a need that had existed since the old doctor retired. Samuel came back too, having saved enough money to start a freight business, following in Luke's early footsteps, but with more modern equipment and expanded routes. Watching their sons build their own lives in Pyramid City, contributing to the town's survival and growth, filled Amelia with deep satisfaction. The community she'd arrived in, desperate and penniless, had become truly home, not just for her but for the next generation. In 1905, Thomas and Elizabeth welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Constance after the woman who'd given Amelia her start. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Amelia felt the circle complete in yet another way. She thought of her own mother, who'd never met her grandchildren, and she silently promised to be present for Constance in all the ways her mother couldn't be for Thomas and Samuel. Luke took to being a grandfather with enthusiasm, playing with little Constance whenever he could, teaching her to count coins at the restaurant, carrying her on his shoulders through town. Watching him with his granddaughter, Amelia saw the young man who'd stopped his wagon on a dark road, the same essential kindness and strength now directed toward a new generation. Samuel married in 1906, a woman named Catherine who worked as a teacher in Pyramid City. Their wedding was joyful, held at the same church where Luke and Amelia had married 26 years earlier, and the reception filled the restaurant with music and laughter. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing joys and sorrows in the way of all lives. The restaurant celebrated its 30th anniversary in 1910, a milestone that seemed impossible when Amelia remembered their small six-table beginning. They'd become a Pyramid City institution, with customers who'd been eating there since opening day and new generations discovering it for the first time. Luke's hair had gone completely silver, and he'd slowed down some, but he still came to the restaurant most days, greeting customers and managing accounts. Amelia still supervised the kitchen, though they had a full-time cook now who handled most of the actual preparation. She preferred it this way, less physically demanding but still involved in ensuring quality. The Sullivan Home for Women continued its work, helping women who arrived in Pyramid City under difficult circumstances. Over the decades, it had assisted hundreds of women, and Amelia took pride in knowing that Constance's legacy and her own story of being helped was being passed forward to new generations. Thomas's medical practice thrived, and he became known throughout the region for his skill and compassion. He and Elizabeth had 3 children by 1912, Constance and 2 younger sons, filling their home with noise and love. Samuel and Catherine had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and Samuel's freight business employed a dozen men and served towns throughout Nevada. In the summer of 1915, Luke and Amelia celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. Their sons organized a party at the restaurant, inviting seemingly everyone in Pyramid City. There were speeches and toasts, memories shared and affection expressed. When Luke stood to speak, the room fell quiet. 35 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his 67 years. I was driving a wagon full of medicine through the night when I saw a woman standing in the middle of the road. I could have driven around her, could have decided it wasn't my problem, but something made me stop, and that decision changed my entire life. He looked at Amelia, love clear in his eyes. Amelia was desperate that night, but she was also brave and determined. She'd lost everything but hadn't given up. She asked for passage on my wagon, and I said she could ride with me as long as she needed. I thought that meant a few miles to town. I didn't know it meant the rest of our lives. Amelia was crying, as were half the people in the room. Luke continued, "These 35 years have been the greatest adventure of my life. We've built businesses and a family, weathered hard times and celebrated good ones. We've loved each other through everything, and I wouldn't change a single moment. Here's to 35 more years, and to the woman who was brave enough to flag down a stranger's wagon in the dark." The room erupted in applause and cheers, and Amelia rose to embrace her husband, this man who'd shown her kindness when she had nothing, and had spent decades proving that his compassion went bone deep. They kissed, not caring that their children and grandchildren and half of Pyramid City were watching, because after 35 years together, they'd earned the right to show their love publicly. The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Grandchildren ran between tables, friends reminisced about earlier times, and the restaurant that Luke and Amelia had built became a testament to what was possible when 2 people worked together with love and determination. In the years that followed, they gradually stepped back from active management of the restaurant, turning it over to a trusted manager while maintaining ownership. They spent more time with their grandchildren, teaching them family recipes and stories about the old days. They traveled some, taking a train to San Francisco to see the ocean, visiting other parts of Nevada they'd never explored. But they always came back to Pyramid City, to the town where they'd built their life together. The house they'd bought when they first married was long paid off, comfortable and familiar. They'd added on over the years, expanding it as their family grew, and now it was filled with memories and love. Luke's health began to decline in his early 70s. Nothing dramatic but a gradual slowing down, the inevitable effects of age. Amelia, a few years younger, remained more active, but she adjusted her pace to match his, understanding that after all their years together, they moved as a unit. On a September evening in 1920, 41 years after the night they'd met, they sat together on their front porch watching the sunset. It had become their favorite ritual, this quiet time together at the end of the day, and neither of them ever tired of Nevada's spectacular skies. "Do you remember," Amelia said, "that first night when you let me ride on your wagon? You said you'd never picked up a stranded woman before. I was your first." "And my last," Luke said, taking her hand. "I found what I needed that night, even though I didn't know I was looking." "We both did," Amelia agreed. "I was looking for safety and a job. I found a home and a life beyond anything I'd imagined. Any regrets at all?" he asked, echoing his question from years earlier. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "Every choice I made, even the painful ones, led me to you and to this life. How could I regret that?" They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the light fade from the sky. Their grandchildren would visit tomorrow, bringing noise and laughter. The restaurant would open in the morning, serving customers who'd been coming for decades. The Sullivan home would continue helping women who needed a fresh start. Life would go on, rich and full. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, the way it had been on a dark road 41 years ago when a desperate woman had begged for passage, and a kind man had said yes. Everything they'd built together, family and business and community, flowed from that single moment of compassion and the decision to help a stranger. As the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, Amelia squeezed Luke's hand and he squeezed back, a wordless conversation they'd perfected over decades. They'd taken a chance on each other in the darkness, and they'd built a life in the light. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it, because they'd faced everything together. The sunset faded completely, leaving only starlight and the warm glow from inside their house, where children and grandchildren would gather tomorrow. Where memories lived in every room and love had soaked into the very walls. Where two people who'd started as strangers had become partners in the truest sense, building dreams together and living a life neither could have imagined alone. Luke and Amelia stayed on that porch until the night air grew cold, reluctant to leave this perfect moment. When they finally went inside, they did so hand in hand, the way they'd done everything for 41 years. The way they'd continue doing until their last days, whenever those came, because some partnerships were meant to last forever. In the end, Amelia's desperate plea for passage on a wagon had led to passage through life itself, carried by love and partnership through every joy and sorrow. And Luke's simple offer to let her ride as long as she needed had become a lifetime commitment, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of kindness on a dark road in the middle of nowhere. Their story became part of Pyramid City's history, told and retold as an example of how love could bloom in unexpected places, how second chances were possible, and how two people building something together could create a legacy that lasted generations. Children who never knew them would eat at their restaurant. Women who never met them would find help at the home established in their name. And somewhere in Nevada, on a road that had long since been paved and modernized, the stars still shone down on the spot where it all began, bearing witness to the enduring power of compassion and love. Years rolled on with the steady rhythm of seasons, each bringing its own joys and challenges. By 1925, Luke and Amelia were in their late 70s, still living in their home, still visited regularly by a growing brood of grandchildren and now great-grandchildren. Thomas's eldest daughter Constance had married and given them their first great-grandchild in 1923, a boy who'd been named Lucas in honor of his great-grandfather. The restaurant had celebrated its 45th anniversary, still thriving under the management they'd put in place, still serving many of the recipes Amelia had perfected decades earlier. The building had been expanded and renovated over the years, but it retained the welcoming atmosphere that had made it successful from the start. When locals showed visitors around Pyramid City, Owens' restaurant was always one of the stops, a point of pride for the community. Luke's health had become more fragile, and he tired easily, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Amelia never wavered. She cared for him with the same devotion he'd shown her throughout their marriage, making sure he ate properly, helping him when his joints grew stiff, and sitting with him every evening on their porch to watch the sunset and talk about their long, full life together. On a warm evening in late September 1925, exactly 46 years after the night they'd met, Luke seemed particularly reflective. They sat in their usual spots on the porch, watching the familiar light show of a Nevada sunset, and he held her hand with gentle pressure. "Amelia," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. These 46 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. When I stopped that wagon to help you, I had no idea I was meeting the woman who'd make every day worth living. You've been my partner, my love, my best friend. Everything good in my life flows from the decision to let you ride with me that night." Amelia felt tears slip down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Luke, you saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me safety when I had none, hope when I'd lost it, and love beyond measure. I'm the one who received the gift." "We saved each other," he corrected. "I was running from commitment, from building anything permanent, and you showed me that roots could be freedom instead of chains. We built something beautiful together, didn't we? The restaurant, the home for women, our sons and their families. It's a good legacy." "It's a wonderful legacy," Amelia agreed. "And it all started because you were kind to a desperate stranger." "Best decision I ever made," Luke said, and he lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it with the same tenderness he'd shown on countless occasions over their decades together. They sat together until full dark, and when they finally went inside, Luke was tired enough that Amelia helped him to bed early. She lay beside him, his head on her shoulder, her fingers gently stroking his silver hair, and they talked about their life together, remembering the best moments and laughing about the challenging ones that seemed funny now with distance. "Promise me something," Luke said, his voice growing drowsy. "Promise me that if I go first, you'll keep living. Keep helping people, keep being part of our grandchildren's lives, keep watching those sunsets. Don't just stop because I'm not here." "Luke, don't talk like that," Amelia protested, though she knew they were both getting old, that this conversation was inevitable. "I need to hear you promise," he insisted. "We've had a wonderful life, but it won't be over just because one of us passes on. Everything we built will continue, and I need to know you'll be part of that." "I promise," Amelia said, her voice breaking. "But you have to promise me the same thing. If I go first, you keep living, keep being you." "I promise," he said, and then he was quiet for a long time, his breathing slow and even. Just when Amelia thought he'd fallen asleep, he spoke again, so softly she almost missed it. "Ride with me as long as you need. That's what I said that night. I didn't know then that I'd need you just as much as you needed me. We've been riding together all this time, and it's been the greatest journey of my life." "Mine too," Amelia whispered. "Mine too." Luke lived another 2 years, growing gradually weaker but maintaining his humor and love until the end. He passed peacefully in the autumn of 1927, surrounded by his family, with Amelia holding his hand. His last words were for her, a simple "I love you" that she held close to her heart in the difficult days that followed. True to her promise, Amelia kept living, kept being part of her family's lives and the community she'd helped build. She missed Luke with an ache that never fully subsided, but she found comfort in the legacy they'd created together. The restaurant continued to thrive. The Sullivan Home for Women kept helping those who needed it. Their sons and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the values of kindness, hard work, and compassion that had defined Luke and Amelia's marriage. Amelia lived to be 85, remaining sharp and engaged with life until very near the end. She still told the story of how she'd met Luke, how she'd begged for passage on his wagon and he'd said yes, changing both their lives forever. She made sure every grandchild and great-grandchild knew that story, understood that compassion and courage could alter the course of lives, that second chances were possible, and that true love was worth fighting for. When she passed in 1930, quietly in her sleep, the entire town of Pyramid City mourned. The funeral was one of the largest the town had ever seen, with people traveling from across Nevada to pay respects to a woman who'd arrived with nothing and built so much. She was buried next to Luke in the town cemetery, under a stone that read "Partners in Life and Love." The restaurant they'd founded continued for another 4 decades, run by their descendants, maintaining the traditions they'd established. When it finally closed in 1970, it was due to changing times rather than any failure, and the building was preserved as a historical landmark. The Sullivan Home for Women evolved over the years, adapting to changing needs, but it never stopped its core mission of helping women find their footing when life knocked them down. Thomas became one of Nevada's most respected physicians, practicing until he was 70. Samuel's freight business grew into a major transportation company that employed hundreds. Their children and grandchildren scattered across the West, but many stayed in or near Pyramid City, maintaining ties to the place their ancestors had made home. In 1979, on the 100th anniversary of the night Luke Owens had stopped his wagon to help Amelia Edwards, the town of Pyramid City held a celebration. Descendants of Luke and Amelia gathered from across the country, 4 generations of children who existed because of a single act of kindness on a dark road. They shared stories, looked at old photographs, and marveled at how one moment of compassion had rippled forward through a century, creating lives and opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The oldest living descendant, a great-great-granddaughter named Ruth who was 72, spoke at the celebration about the legacy Luke and Amelia had left. They taught us that kindness matters, that building something with another person is better than building alone, and that love is worth the risk. My great-great-grandmother was desperate that night, but she was brave enough to ask for help. My great-great-grandfather was kind enough to give it. Everything our family is today flows from those 2 facts. The story of Luke and Amelia became part of Nevada's folklore, a real-life romance that captured imaginations. Historians wrote about them. Their restaurant appeared in books about the Old West, and the spot where they met, now marked with a commemorative plaque, became a place where people proposed and newlyweds took photographs, believing the location carried special luck for lasting love. But beyond the public legacy, Luke and Amelia's real impact was more personal and profound. Every woman who found help at the Sullivan home was living proof that second chances existed. Every meal served at their restaurant, even decades after they were gone, carried forward their commitment to quality and community. Every descendant who chose kindness over convenience, who helped a stranger in need, who built partnerships based on equality and respect, was carrying forward their values. The road where they met was eventually absorbed into a larger highway system, paved and widened and marked with signs directing travelers to cities and attractions. But locals still knew the spot, still told the story of the desperate woman and the compassionate man who stopped to help her. On clear September nights, when the stars shone bright over the Nevada desert, it wasn't hard to imagine a wagon creaking down that road, a lantern swinging, and 2 people meeting who'd change each other's lives forever. Their story endured because it spoke to something universal, the hope that kindness still existed, that love could bloom in unexpected places, that building a life together was possible even when starting from nothing. In a harsh landscape that had broken many people, Luke and Amelia had chosen to build rather than destroy, to love rather than isolate, to create a legacy of compassion that lasted far beyond their years. When descendants gathered for reunions in later years, they always toasted the memory of Luke and Amelia, the couple whose love story had started with a desperate plea and a simple yes, and had grown into something that touched hundreds of lives across generations. They raised their glasses and repeated the words that had started it all. "She begged for passage on his wagon," someone would say, beginning the familiar story. "The cowboy said, 'Ride with me as long as you need,'" another would continue. "And she rode with him for the rest of their lives." They'd finish together, smiling at the beautiful simplicity of it, the way two people had found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a single act of kindness and the courage to accept it. Their legacy lived on in every act of compassion their descendants performed, every partnership built on equality and respect, every second chance given to someone in need. Luke and Amelia would have been astonished and humbled to know how far their story reached, how many lives were touched by their example. But they would have been most proud of the simple fact that their descendants kept choosing kindness, kept building rather than destroying, kept believing that love and partnership could transform lives. In the end, that was the real legacy of the woman who begged for passage and the cowboy who said yes, not the businesses they built or the wealth they accumulated, but the example they set of what was possible when two people chose to build dreams together, to love fiercely and faithfully, and to leave the world better than they found it. Their story became timeless because it embodied hope, the belief that desperate situations could transform into beautiful lives, that strangers could become soulmates, and that a single moment of compassion could ripple forward through generations, creating light in the darkness for all who came after.